The first one is thinking of the field I used to contribute to, theoretical linguistics. It is the case that the perspective that has dominated for 60, almost 70 years now, is not going through its best period. Here referring to, what people might call transformational generative grammar or Chomsky linguistics. For various reasons, I think that portion of the field is not going through a very productive period.
There are indeed too many theories, and there's a great reluctance in the curricula of linguistics departments and in the way people talk about linguistics to really incorporate data from other areas.
I think everybody conceives of language as a mapping between sound and meaning. But if you look at the predominant theories of the components of language, you find they don't really connect with each other to give us this mapping. The minimalist program in syntax, it doesn't look at all like formal truth conditional semantics, and neither of them has anything whatsoever to do with optimality theory and phonology. So how do these pieces fit together to do the things language needs to do? We're stuck with something that's sort of like a beast with the head of a lion, the body of a camel, and maybe the tail of a chicken. None of these three looks much like something the brain can do in the course of comprehending or producing language.
Si tú me preguntas, otro dilema fundamental es construir puentes teóricas entre lingüística, análisis, discurso por un lado, ciencias cognitivas por otro lado, y no solamente cognitiva lingüística, que es solamente una cosa muy pequeña, y las ciencias sociales, también ciencia política. El segundo dilema es, Juan, para resumir, construir puentes entre las disciplinas que no solamente para nosotros como profes y investigadores con mucha experiencia, sino también sobre todo para estudiantes de doctorado, contribuyen a cosas nuevas. Y mi experiencia de muchos años es la renovación en nuestras áreas, sea lingüística o análisis discurso, es siempre entre las disciplinas.
Saying that we can take advantage of many tools, many knowledge bases, many findings from other disciplines, that's fantastic. That is the thing that keeps me excited and going every day. But at the same time, it requires you to develop some skills, to become knowledgeable in various areas. And that's just not easy.
How we connect syntactic theory and the work we do as syntacticians better with the work that other people do in linguistics more generally, right? How do we connect it better with the formal semanticists, with the morphologists? Okay, we're pretty good at that to a certain extent, but how do we connect it with the experimentalists, with the neurolinguists, with the sociolinguists, and so on? And not only that, I think that, we syntacticians have had a bit of an attitude problem over years. So we can be a little bit like, yeah, what we do is so cool and interesting and forbidding and impossible. That's because we're really clever and you're not, right?
I think it's important not to lose sight of the goal of the enterprise. Sure, you can spend as much time as you want on the morpheme in a language, which is important, but also important to remember what's the study of that morpheme is for. It's really for general theory of language, contributing general theory of mind. So in order to do so, I think we need to think a little more broadly. We need to read a little more broadly, and we need to have a healthy relationship with other fields and other disciplines, and while still recognizing the value of the traditional structural analysis of language, which is something we're good at, right? We can bring a lot to the table when we interact with psychologists and neuroscientists, computer scientists, and so on. We have a lot to offer, but at the same time, they have a lot to offer to us as well. So that, I think, would be some of the main challenges, especially as the field of linguistics begins to engage, I suppose, more widely than before.
It is very, very kind of crucial, I think, for us as a field to always remember that the aim is to characterize the human linguistic capacity. It is not to describe a particular instantiation of it, because every given language is a particular instantiation of it, and without looking into it, we're not going to be able to proceed with the bigger picture. So when you look at a language that hasn't been studied, I think the task is really, first of all, of course, to give it a description, but to also see the extent to which it tells us that our modeling needs to be stretched, needs to be narrowed, needs to be accommodated. So every new grammar that we look at, I mean, if it just falls out, it falls out, that's great. But if it doesn't fall out, it requires for us to take a hard look at our model.
If it's knowledge, it has to be somewhere in your memory. It has to be in your head somehow or another. And this is what puts linguistics squarely in the study of the mind and the brain. So a more upfront way of putting the question is, what kinds of mental representations do we store in memory when we know a language? And how are these representations put to use? And that leads to the question, of course, of how the knowledge gets there. How do people learn languages? And in order to answer that question, we can go on and ask, what sort of mental equipment do you need in order to acquire a language? And I think these questions are at the basis of modern linguistic theory, and they're what connects linguistics with the cognitive sciences, and eventually with biology, we hope.
As linguists, we know that in order to document and understand a language, just making recordings of that language is not enough. In order to really understand the grammatical properties of a language, we need to be able to work together with speakers of the language to learn not just what are the grammatical sentences of the language, but also which sentences are ungrammatical, which sentences would speakers never produce, which is something that, of course, you don't find from texts. We also need to know about different contexts when a certain sentence would be felicitous or not. We need to know about potential ambiguities. Again, things that we can't get just by making recordings, things that we need to do by working together with a speaker of the language.
A few decades ago, someone estimated that maybe 90% of the world's languages are endangered. That was considered pessimistic. Now, if anything, that would be considered optimistic. So in a sense, we're fighting an urgent struggle to document the world's languages before they die out. Of course, we hope that things can be done so that they do not die out, that communities will be encouraged to preserve their languages, but in many cases, this will not happen, and therefore language documentation is very important.
A major challenge I see for linguistics as an empirical science is what people talk about as language endangerment. I add to that language erosion, at least about sort of like over 30 indigenous languages in Argentina, and how many of them are learned by children? Not many. And there comes the erosion if they are learned by children. Do children learn them in a full form, or is something being lost? In my experience, lots of things are being lost.
Children seem to know a lot more than we think. It's just a matter of experimental techniques, or there is something more. This is also connected to the findings that comprehension and production do not always align, and sometimes one is more advanced than the other. What does this mean?
Lo que me parece difícil y también fundamental es reconciliar los deberes de un cientista que tiene que colectar datos, tiene que analizar datos, hacer publicaciones, hacer presentaciones para el mundo académico, pero al mismo tiempo, para esta colaboración con la comunidad, hay que entrar en preguntas de educación, de lo que quiere la comunidad. Es una colaboración hoy en día, no es más este modelo extractivo del colonialismo, ¿no?